A disturbing case out of New York. A father, now charged with murder, is accused of throwing his son into the Bronx River. Authorities identifying the toddler as Montrell Williams. He was just 2 years old. Thank you for joining us. I'm Kennedi Walker, and I'll walk you through the details. You're watching Law and Crime. This is a Law and Crime legal alert. If you received Depo-Provera birth control shots and were later diagnosed with a brain or spinal tumor called meningioma, you may be eligible for a lawsuit. Morgan & Morgan is investigating claims that patients weren't properly warned about this risk. It's free to check, takes just a few minutes, and you don't pay unless they win. So scan the QR code on your screen, click the link below, or go to forthepeople.com/LCDepo to see if you qualify. A 20-year-old New York father now facing murder charges, accused of throwing his 2-year-old son into the Bronx River. Arius Williams appearing in court as prosecutors lay out a disturbing case. Police say they have video evidence showing the moment Williams allegedly tossed his son, Montrell Williams, to his death. Montrell was last seen on May 10th. According to the New York Daily News, Montrell's mother left him in his father's care that night so he could attend a Mother's Day gathering with Williams' side of the family. The two parents shared split custody. But investigators say an argument broke out and Williams allegedly stormed out of the home with Montrell, who was wearing only a shirt, a diaper, and wrapped in a blanket. Montrell was supposed to be returned to his mother the next day, May 11th. But when that didn't happen, she contacted police and filed a complaint in family court. But weeks went by and still no sign of Montrell. On May 28th, a judge issued an order for Williams to produce the child. Then, on June 8th, after weeks of silence, Montrell's mother spotted Williams on the street and confronted him, demanding to know where their son was. According to the complaint, Williams allegedly pulled a knife, threatened her, and said that he had thrown Montrell into the river. She reportedly called police again. Williams was arrested on a custodial interference warrant, and she was granted an order of protection. Williams refused to say where the boy was and was sent to jail. NYPD divers searched the Bronx River and officially recovered a body. During arraignment, prosecutors revealed that video allegedly shows Montrell was still alive when he was thrown into the water. The child was reportedly standing at one point, and then the video allegedly shows Williams throw the child over the bridge and then walk in front of a gas station without the child. Montrell's family describes him as a sweet, joyful toddler. A vigil was held in the community to honor his short life. And here to break down the story with me is family law attorney Randy Kessler. Randy, thank you so much for coming on today.
My pleasure.
So let's just jump right in. When you first hear about a case like this, a father allegedly killing his child during a custody dispute, what stands out to you from a family law perspective?
I mean, first of all, the horrible tragedy, right? That just hits us. You never get immune to that. You can only be desensitized so much. This is the worst of the worst. But what strikes me is we hear these claims, and you don't want to say the boy who cried wolf. We hear mothers in particular say he's going to be dangerous with the child. He's not going to take care of the child. And, when are they telling the truth? When are they, is it my job to figure out who's telling the truth? Is it the court's job? Because there's this balancing act of dads have rights too. And why should there be a presumption that a dad can't take care of a child? So the courts are always stuck in the middle of someone who's being overprotective versus someone who's got a real finger on their pulse. But I guess what strikes me, to answer your question, is, in a situation like this, you trust the people that know, right? Mom knows, grandma knows. And I guess maybe the judge has heard too many times, it sounds like she went to try to get protective orders or try to get the police to help. And they said, nah, this is what we always hear. Dad's not able to take care of his own kid. You're just an overprotective mom. And that is a bias. It is a prejudice that we have to overcome. We have to do some more training with our authorities, with law enforcement, because, every now and then you might be overprotective, but it's worth it, right? It's worth it to be overprotective and maybe check up on a dad when mom says he's not doing the right thing or he's a danger. And maybe mom's wrong. What's the harm? In this case, there would have been a lot of benefit to following through on mom's questions and mom's request for protection. And that's the sadness to me, is that this general prejudice against, overprotective mothers really may have been what caused the death of this child.
Right. And you bring up a really good point there. Just how much oversight does the court actually have once an agreement is in place?
Well, the court's not involved anymore. When the case is over, the case is over. It's on the parties to seek relief. And apparently she did seek some relief and ultimately got it. But you got to remember, courts hear so many cases where there actually is evidence of abuse, where there's pictures of a father putting a cigarette out on the child's chest, or someone who's got a text message saying, "I'll never return your child." And so courts have so many of these cases that they're dealing with. And then they get a case like this where the mother comes in and says, he's the father. We do have joint rights, and the father's got, the rights to the child, but something doesn't feel right. He took off with the child and he won't tell me where he is. That's just not as dangerous to a judge. It doesn't sound as dangerous to a judge as one where a mother comes in and says, "I've got pictures and videos of the child kicking and screaming and the dad hurting the child." So there's a balancing act. Courts can't do it all. Unfortunately, courts act after the fact, not before the fact. There's too many after the fact situations where judges have to come in and punish somebody or repair the situation to ask judges preemptively to say, "Judge, I have a suspicion that my ex is going to do something bad. Can you help me?" They're worried about the ones where the harm already happened. So it's just hard system we're in. Courts are underfunded, understaffed. And maybe we need to spend more money on our courts and get more judges and get more staff.
Well, it definitely sounds like it because, I mean, this isn't the first instance of a father allegedly committing crimes against their children. Within the last month, we heard of this story. We heard of the Travis Decker situation. He was a father and a veteran from Washington who had a custody agreement in place, and now he's accused of killing his three daughters. Why do you think that this keeps happening? And we understand there's issues with the court, but at what point do they take some type of responsibility here?
Well, I think it's, we're all responsible, right? We pass the laws. And, we always hear about departments of family and children's services, neglecting or not catching something before it happens. But I, as a family lawyer, I see the flip side too. I see a lot of times a family that's falsely accused and DFACS or the governmental agency in whichever state it's in comes in, takes the child away from the family, investigates. It takes 3 weeks, 2 months, and they say, "Oh, there's nothing there." And they return the child back. Well, that causes harm too. So it's a balance. And these people that work for these agencies, what a tough job, right? There's not a lot of money to pay them. There's quick burnout. They're always accused of not acting fast enough, not helping a child. And when they do help a child, no one pats them on the back and they don't get a lot of awards and recognition. So it's just a hard situation. I think the best advice is self-help. I'm seeing a lot of clients now that are putting air tags in their child's clothes, make sure that they can track their child, make sure that, their child has a cell phone that's got, the Find Me application open. A lot of people just have to think ahead of time. Don't trust the government to protect you. You got to engage in some self-help that's not offensive. You don't keep a child from their dad, but maybe you have some protections in place. Maybe you offer to have dad have his visitation in a place where he can be watched, or maybe you hire a private investigator. It's hard to have to think like this, but you got to think ahead and try to prevent it. And I'm sure, grandma obviously knew her antenna went up and she complained about it, but nobody listened. It's just a tragedy.
Absolutely. And you bring up a good suggestion there with the Apple AirTags. I mean, there's more technology coming out every day. And unfortunately, we do have to think ahead. But if it means keeping our children safe, that definitely was a good idea. But in hindsight, with this situation in particular, do you think that the system moved fast enough once the mother filed that initial complaint? Because there were weeks between the time Montrell went missing and when police arrested his father. What stands out to you about that timeline?
Well, there's a reason that some cliches stick, right? And the one about hindsight being 2020, that sticks here. Sure, the authorities, the law enforcement should have taken her seriously. They should have followed up, and they should have said, even though he's dad and he's got the rights, if you really feel bad about this, maybe we'll do something. But I got to tell you, Kennedy, even if they had done something, it sounds like it was too late, right? So it was, had dad been kidnapping the child and hiding him out somewhere and they could have found him, then it would have been an even worse tragedy that they didn't do something, because then it would have been preventable. At this point in time, the sad news is they might have found the child a little bit earlier, but the chances of the child surviving that fall and being alone in the river, I'm not sure that them acting differently would have had a real actual difference. But still, I don't know. I wasn't there. I don't know how she presented. I don't know how the officer in charge at the desk received it, or whoever it was on the phone. But somehow somebody should have taken it more seriously, certainly, and they should have done some follow up. And the proof is in the pudding. Had they done some follow up, they would have seen that she was telling the truth. But again, I don't know that it would have made a difference. And maybe that's some solace that what he did, and it was over and done then. The rest was just figuring out that he did it and bringing closure a little faster. He wasn't kidnapping, wasn't holding the child hostage somewhere where really law enforcement could have made a much bigger difference.
Well, some are wondering why the father wasn't already in custody by that point, though, because after weeks of silence, the mother sees him on the street randomly and said that he allegedly pulled out a knife and admitted to throwing the child in the river. And that's when she called police again. But if she reported the child missing the very next day to police, I guess what took so long for them to find him and arrest him?
I mean, I don't know what took them so long, but pulling out a knife, that sounds like an assault, maybe a battery if he touched her. Maybe he should have been taken off the streets right then. And again, I'm the eternal optimist. Thank goodness he didn't go out and do this to other people and other children while law enforcement failed to arrest him. It sounds like, and again, I'm hearing the bare minimum, but it sounds like he should have been arrested and he should have been taken off the streets because he was a danger. On the other hand, maybe he needs some psychological intervention. That's what it sounds like. They were asking for a psychological evaluation. Um, he's going to get that. I'm sure his lawyer is going to say that that's a defense to what he did. Uh, but yeah, this guy should not be on the streets, assuming that his confession is legit and that he's the one who did this. Yeah, he should never be let out of jail for the rest of his life. And I can't imagine what life's going to be like for him in jail with that kind of crime on his record.
Right. And we'll get to his potential defense in a moment, but we know that the prosecution says that there's video allegedly showing the moment that Montrell was thrown into the river. How significant is that in terms of building the case?
It's significant. It's more for the punishment part because it sounds like he confessed. It sounds like he's not going to deny it. I imagine he's going to take a plea and he's going to argue that he should get some help. But yeah, throwing a child into the, I mean, you can't make that stuff up. That's the stuff of horror movies and scary movies. And, this fact that someone would actually do that to anybody, much less to a child, much less to their own child. Um, and it begs the question, it almost proves his case that he's crazy. I like to say that all murderers have something wrong with them, right? To murder a human being and to take the life of somebody, you have to have some screws loose and something wrong with your mind and with your brain. But to do it to your own child, to a child this young, um, it's almost automatic that he's mentally insane. The question is, did he know what he was doing? Does he get off the hook to some degree because he had that mental incompetency? I don't think so. But to answer your question, Kennedy, which is what you want me to do, it's terrific evidence for the prosecution, terrible evidence for the defense. The defense can't go to trial and let the jury see that. It's terrible.
Absolutely. And the fact that the child was allegedly alive when he was thrown, I mean, what does that say to you? Again, you kind of touched on it, just the mental state of the father and the fact that after you have video of him just walking past the gas station as if nothing even happened.
Yeah, it tells me that he was out of his mind and there's something wrong with him. It also goes to the punishment, right? When you think about how long do you punish somebody for, there's murder and there's murder and there's murder. And there's, hitting somebody with a car, there's poisoning somebody, but there's taking a living human being, a child that's dependent on you for survival and looks to you, for help and throwing that innocent child over the side and the jury thinking not just that there was a murder, but it wasn't a quick murder. There was suffering. There was the fall. There was the drowning. There was the trying to swim, wondering why would my daddy do this to me? All those factors are going to play into what the sentence is. Cannot imagine he gets anything short of a life behind bars.
And now let's get into the possible defense. I know we said maybe a mental health defense, maybe an insanity defense. Walk us through how exactly that would go if his defense is already claiming mental health for the father. What will the testing look like? What exactly has to happen for that to get approved, and do we think that that will work?
It may, but it's sort of like all he has. Unless he recants and says, I didn't mean to admit to it, or I was just trying to scare my ex and tell her. But apparently, if he told her this is what I did and he confessed to it, then the only defense is that he was out of his mind and he's got a mental defense. But it has to be that he didn't know right from wrong, that he didn't know what he was doing. And it sounds like he knew what he was doing. He was doing it intentionally. And he told the mother, I was doing this. He was angry at her or angry at grandma or angry at the world. So I don't know that a mental defense is going to work. And, mental defense really means you don't know what you're doing and you can't tell right from wrong. Certainly sounds like he knew exactly what he was doing. And it wasn't like he just in a moment of rage punched somebody or hit somebody. He had to go to the bridge. He had to see the water below. He had to pick the child up and put the child. I mean, there were a bunch of acts that were all intentional. It was too much of a deliberate act, in my opinion, to prevail on a mental health defense. But again, you got nothing else. They're going to have to try it if it goes to trial.
Right. And the family says that there was an argument before Williams stormed out with the child. I mean, how often do we see emotional custody conflicts turn dangerous like this?
Yeah, they turn dangerous all the time, but that goes more to the intent, right? That he had a motive now. He was angry at everybody. But unfortunately, we hear this all the time. I'll never let her see this child again. Or I'm going to make sure that if she doesn't want to be with me, then she's not going to have the thing that's most precious to her child. People get ugly and people think about how can they react. And you talk about criminal law being a dangerous place where people get upset because you're dealing with criminals. Well, family law is where it hits home. A court or a judge or a spouse or an ex-lover is going to tell you what your relationship's going to be with your child, what your relationship's going to be with your money. People get angry and they react very angrily in these situations, and nobody really says, "Oh yeah, I deserve that." A lot of people deserve what they get. In this case, it's not about deserving; it's about trying to figure out what's best for the child. And the courts decided that this child should be with mom, or should be, or the family decided grandma should be watching the child. He just didn't like that, and whatever it is that he didn't like about it, he found a way to show them and to get back at them. Fortunately, they caught him. Fortunately, he didn't hurt anybody else. And fortunately, he's not going to be able to do harm to anybody else.
And when you think about the mother who did everything right by calling the police, going to court, I mean, how frustrating must this feel for her?
Yeah, she's got to feel helpless. Although, and again, the world's upside down in my world, the way that we see things and the stuff that we see as divorce lawyers and family lawyers. In some small way, she could sleep better at night probably than a lot of other people, right? Because she at least tried. You know, she's not going to be happy. She's not going to be satisfied with that she did enough. She's not going to think that, oh, well, I did everything I could. But at least she did try and she got out there. And there's somebody to blame, which is the system or the law enforcement. It doesn't make it better. It doesn't bring her child back. But I got to there's some silver lining there. And I think she can use this, and she probably will use this, like we see a lot of people do, to help fix the world and to change laws and to make the laws better and to tell legislators, look, because the law enforcement agency didn't listen to me and didn't act fast enough because fathers have a right and he had legal custody, so he had the right to do this. They ignored me. Don't let this happen to somebody else. Maybe some good will come of it.
Well, do you think that she may have a case against anyone or against the system? If you were representing her, what would you suggest?
I think it's hard. I think she can effectuate change and she's got a lot of sympathy, but to blame somebody, and again, as I said earlier, I don't know that if they had acted faster, that they would have saved this child's life. Had he been holding the child hostage somewhere where the law enforcement could have found the child before the child died, then maybe a claim would have been more viable. But had they acted, and it's sort of like a personal injury case where you've got to have causation and damages. And what are the damages? What could they have done once he'd already thrown the child off the bridge? Could they have caught him sooner? Yeah, but had they been able to catch the guy before he did something bad, there would be a viable lawsuit. The rest of it would be just what we call punitive damages or to try to set the record straight. And really, the better way to effectuate that is to go to the legislature and pass laws and make law enforcement, child agencies, child protective services have more power to be able to step in and keep people, even people with legitimate rights to custody, from doing things to their children. And a lot of those laws are already on the books, Kennedy. It's just a question of, you got to gauge the situation and you got to train the people. And again, like I said earlier, there's not a lot of money. These people are just trying to do good. The people that work for child protective services and agencies like that, and they're making judgment calls every day. And in this case, even if they got it wrong, I guess another silver lining is I'm not sure they could have done anything to protect this child. It's a terrible tragedy. And, next time, hopefully they don't even let this guy have access to the child. And mom has the rights to have a piece of paper that says dad is not alone with his child. So when she goes to the police, she can say, I've got a court order that says he should not be unsupervised. He's taking my child. Then the police would have acted.
Well, do you think that she has a case just for like the weeks of mental anguish that she went through, if she went to the police the very next day. I understand what you're saying. Like, if there it really is video of the father allegedly throwing Montrell, into the water, then the child unfortunately would have been deceased. But the fact that this took over a month for them to, quote, take her seriously, I'm just trying to see if she has any type of case with that. But it sounds like maybe she doesn't.
Maybe she does, maybe she doesn't. I'm sure there's a lawyer somewhere who'll take the case, right? And not bad mouthing lawyers. Look, there may be some legitimate claims there, but the question is not what's her mental anguish about losing her child. The issue in that case that you're talking about, Kennedy, would be what's the mental anguish for not pursuing him and not arresting him sooner for having done that, and what is the mental anguish? And I don't think, that there are tremendous damages for that. I think it's horrible, but I think the damages might be a question of we don't want this case to go any further. We acknowledge that we should have arrested him sooner. Let's go ahead and pay some money because we should have acted sooner, and we don't want the blemish on our law enforcement agencies. So there may be a lawsuit there. Again, it's not the kind of law I practice. We don't sue for that kind of negligence. But certainly, where there's a will and there's anger, and I think the way it gets resolved all depends on how the people involved, how the managers and the lawyers handle it. If they own up to it and say, look, we apologize, we should have acted sooner, it's going to be a lot better for everybody than if they get defensive and say, we didn't do anything wrong. And she says, but you could have done something better. And they go back and forth. And sometimes people sue because they want the world to know that the system didn't work. And sometimes it's not a matter of money. Maybe it's not mental anguish. She just wants to make sure this law department acts faster next time. And she's going to expose them and expose what they did wrong. So yeah, there certainly could be a lawsuit for a whole bunch of reasons.
Right. Well, for this case, against Mr. Williams, how long do we think that it could take to go to trial? Or do you think that there will just be a plea?
I don't know what there is to try, but the nice thing for him about going to trial is that he's innocent until proven guilty. So in the eyes of the law, today he's innocent. And the longer it takes to get to trial, the longer he's innocent. On the other hand, we got to remember that plea deals often offer something. I'm not sure what they could offer him. Maybe it's something short of a life in jail. Maybe to save the county the money and the risk of not getting a conviction, they offer him life with the possibility of parole. And if he goes to trial, then they say the sentence is going to be life without parole. But it sounds like he needs help. Sounds like he needs to be off the streets. It sounds like he's going to try to get a plea deal. But if it's life in jail for the rest of his life, sort of what has he got to lose by going to trial? And maybe somebody on the jury is crazy enough to say, I don't think he really did it. I don't think he intended to do it. I think it was an accident. I think he was mistaken. Stranger things have happened. But how long could it take to get to trial? It doesn't sound like they need to do a lot of investigation. There are not a lot of witnesses to investigate and to bring in and subpoena. There's not a lot of evidence and DNA and guns and gunpowder and casings and shells like in a lot of cases. Sounds like the facts are already there. The evidence is already there. Sounds like they could go to trial immediately if he doesn't want to plead guilty. I imagine within the next few months, they'll be trying to set it for trial.
Well, this is a story that we will be following closely. Randy, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you, Kennedy.
Arius Williams is being held without bail. For Law&Crime, I'm Kennedi Walker.